Hello guys. So in our class today we're going to see array tracing. We're going to cover the concept of array tracing here, and we're going to trace a sample code. This code is array trace A. So we're going to start from the very first line of this code. That first what we did, we look into the code and we find out which variables are used here. First of all, in the code there is a variable myArray. What does it stores? It stores the location of a created array, and here we have kept two other integer type variables, index1 and index2. So I have kept those variables in my trace table. And after that, uh, what's written on this part? So if you look into this part, we're going to see this part in the later part of the code. Let's mm, start from the first line. Like, at first what we did, we're going to create an array which is named as my array, and here we're specifying the data types. That means my array will contain integer type datas, and what's the size of the array. After declaring the array, on the right part we can see it is assigning 10 memory locations in the memory. That means we'll be storing 10 integers on the memory. And this part of the code, this tries to give a pictorial view of what happens inside the code. So inside the code, basically we're creating an array with 10 integers on it. So the location of the array, for example, this is stored in a location address 1. And here, since array indexes always starts from 0, we have created 10 memory locations, and which are indicated by the indexes from 0 to 9. And this part of the code, we're going to show the output that is generated from the code below. Okay, so when the array gets created, it gets created in a specific memory location. Here for our code, the memory location is address 1. So in the myArray variable, we're going to store the address where the array is created. Moving on to the next part, and here we have initialized in line 2 two variables which are integer type variables. Like, they're initialized to the value of 0. So index 1 and 2 both refers to 0. In the third line we're updating the value of index 1. So what we did, we're updating the value of index 1 to 1. This is what we did, and we're going to check whether index 1 is less than 10. Before checking this, let's look into the code, like how many loops are present there. Here we have an outer loop here, and we have an inner loop here. So we have to specify the number of loops present in the code. So at first we'll look into the outer loop. What it's checking? It's checking basically whether the value of index 1 is less than 10. So the value of index 1 is 1 here. Is it less than 10? Yeah, it's less than 10. So we move on to the rest of the code. So what we're doing here, we're updating uh, in the value, the index 1 of the array. That means we're updating the first index of our array. So what we're doing here, we're adding two values here, the value of index 1 and integer what is 3. So we're adding that. So we get a value of 4 in index 1, and now we have updated index 2 to 1. So after updating index 2, what we're checking whether the value in index 2 is less than the value in index 1. No, they're not less than that. So what we did, we did not get inside the loop because the output, the condition is false, so we do not move to this part of the code. So what we do here, we move on to the rest. That means we're going to this part, we're going to print the my array at index 1. So what's the value of my array at index 1? It is 4. So we're going to print this. Then we're done with first part. So now we're moving on to the second part of the code. So after printing the value of my array at index 1, what we do, we increment index 1 by 1. So now the value of index 1 becomes 2. So now we move on to the first part of the loop, and then we check again, like whether the value of index 1 is less than 10. Yes, the value of index 1 is less than 10. So now we're going to update the value of my array at index 1. So now index 1 refers to 2, that means that refers to the index 2. Okay, so what we did here, we update the value at 2. So we add the previous value of index 1 plus an integer value of 3, and the resulting value is 5. So we updated the value of my array at index 1. Now we set the value of index 2 to 1. That means we update the previous value with 1. In this case, nothing has changed because the previous value was 1. So we're now updating the value of my array at index 1. That means that's referring to this index. Okay, so we're adding the previous value of index 1. That means the previous value that we have updated right now is 5, and we're adding it with my array at index 2. That means we're adding the value 4, and we're subtracting the value of index 1, which is 2. So we're subtracting 2 here. So 5 plus 4 minus 2, that means we do 9 minus 2, we get a value of 7. Then what we do, then we update the value of index 2 by 1. So we update the value of index 2, and it is now 2. So after updating the value of index 2, we're not done with the inner loop. So we check again whether the value of index 2 is less than the value of index 1, but they're not less than each other, so the condition is false and we break the loop. So now we move on to the print line statement. So what we're doing here, we're printing the value of my array at index of 1. So this is what we print. We print the value of 7, and this is our output in step 2. And once we're done with step 2, we update the value of index 1. That means we update the value of index 1 by 1, and this is now 3. So then again we go on to the first part of the loop. So now we have the value of index 1 as 3. So we check that 3 is less than 10 or not. Yeah, 3 is less than 10, so we move on this part. We update the value of my array at index 1. Now we go to my array at index 1, and we update the value. We add the current value of index 1 here with an integer value 3. So the resulting value is 6. This is the updated value of my array at index 1, which refers to this specific index. Now what we do, now we update the value of index 2 to 1. So after updating this part, we're checking the inner loop, whether the value of index 2 is less than the value of index 1. Yeah, it is less than the value of index 1. So move on to the inner part of the loop. So what we do here, we update the value of my array at index 1, and we add the current value of my array at index 1, which is 6, with the value of my array at index of 2, which refers to index, this specific index. So we add the value of this specific index, which is 4, and we subtract the current value of index 1. That means we subtract 3. So what we get here is 10 minus 3. So we get a value of 7. Okay, this is what we get here. So moving on to the next part. So now we updated the value of index 2 by 1. So the value of index 2 is now updated. This becomes 2. So what we do here, so we're going to delete all of this to make the whole part of the code visible. So we update whether 2 is less than 3. Yeah, it is less than 3. So we update the value of my array at index 1. We add the value, the current value, with the value of my array at index 2, which is also 7, and we subtract the value of index 1, which is 3. So what we're doing here, we're doing 14 minus 3. So 14 minus 3 is 11. We did this, and now we update the value of index 2 by 1, so which becomes 3 here. So after updating, we check the inner loop whether the value of index 2 is less than the value of index 1. No, it is not less, so we break out of the loop and we go to the next line. So print the value of my array at index of 1, which is 11. Now we print this value and we increment the value of index 1 by 1. So we add 1 to it, we get 4. After that, we're done with the outer loop, so we go there, we check whether we need to iterate the loop again or not. Okay. Okay, now the value of index 1 is 4, which is less than 10, so we move on inside the loop. So what we do here, we update the my array at index of 1, which refers to this specific index, and we're going to update the value. We will add 3 to the current value of index 1. Let's add 3 to the current value of index 1, so we get 7 here. So after that, what we do, we update the value of index 2 to 1. So after updating this, we check whether the value of index 2 is less than the value of index 1. So we move on inside the inner loop. So we update the my array at index 1, which refers to this index. So we're updating it, we're adding the current value of my array at index 1, 7, plus the value of my array at index of 2. So that means it refers to this index. We're adding it and we're subtracting the current value of index 1. This is what we subtract. So we get 7. So after that, so I'm going to delete all of it for making the whole code visible. So after that, what we do, we update the value of my array at index 1 again. So before updating that, we update the value of index 2 by 1, so it becomes 2 now. So is 2 less than 4? Yeah, 2 is less than 4. So we update the value again, the my array at index 1, it we add this to the value of my array at index of 2, which refers to this index. So we add 7 and we subtract the value of index 1. So what we get here, we get 14 minus 4, which is 10. This is after updating the part, and then we update the value of index 2 by 1, which becomes 3. So we go again, we check the loop, index of 2, that means 3 is less than index of 1. Yeah, it is less than index of 1. So we update the value again, we add the current value of my array at index of 1, 10, plus the value of my array at index of 2, which now refers to this index 11, and we subtract the current value of index 1. So we subtract 4, we get 21 minus 4. So what we get here, we get 17. So this is the updated value here. So now what we do, we update the value of index 2. So we update the value of index 2 by 1, we get 4. Now it checks whether index 2 is less than index 1. No, it is not less than each other, they're equal. So we break out of the loop and we print the value of my array at index 1. That means we print the value of this one, 17. So we print it right there, and after printing I'm going to clear all of this. Okay, so that now we update the value of index 1 by 1. So we make it 5, and we again check the loop whether 5 is less than 10. Yeah, 5 is less than 10. So now we update my array at index 1, which refers to this index, with the current value of index 1 plus 3, we get a value of 8. And after that, we initialize the value of index 2 to 1. We update the value to 1. So we update the value to 1 now, and we're checking whether 1 is less than 5. Yeah, 1 is less than 5, so we move on to this part. We update the value of my array at index 1. So we update it, we add the current value with my array at index 2. That means we add it with 1, which means this one, 4. 4, and we subtract the value of index 1, which is 5 here. So we get what? We get 12 minus 5. So we subtract it, we get 7. And now I'm going to delete all of it for better visualization. And now we're going to update the value of index 2 by 1. We make it 2, and we check whether the value of index 2 is less than the value of index 1. Yeah, it is less than each other, so we move on to this part. We add the current value of my array at index 1 with the value of my array at index 2, which refers to this index here, 7, and we subtract the current value of index 1, 5, and 14 minus 5, so we get a value of 9 here. So removing the rest of the part here except the updated value, so 9. Now what we do, we update the value of index 2 by 1 again, we get 3, whether index 2 is less than index 1, and now it's less than one another. And now we move on to this part again. We add the current value of index 1, 9, with the value my array at index 2, that means 11, and we subtract the current value of index 1, that means we subtract 5 here. We get 20 minus 5, so we get a value of 15 here. So after that, what we do, we update the value of index 2 by 1. It is updated to 4 now, and we move on to this part. We now check again like whether the value of index 2 is less than the value of index 1. Yeah, 4 is less than 5, so move on to the inner loop again. So we update the value of my array at index 1, this index. We add the current value at index 1, which is 15, plus the my array at index 2, which refers to this index. So we add 17, we subtract 5 from here, so we get 15 plus 17, we get 32, minus 5, so we get what? We get 27 here. So we update the value as 27. So we're done with this one. We update the value of index 2 to 5 now. We're going to check whether index 2 is less than index 1. No, they're not less, they're equal. So we break out of the loop. So what we check now? So we check now, like index 1 now becomes 6. So we check whether 6 is less than 10. Yes, 6 is less than 10. So we'll go on with the rest of the code. I think you can solve the rest of the part by yourselves. If you face any kind of problems, just let me know. Okay, you can do a comment on the Google Classroom and I'll respond to it. And okay students, I'm done with this tracing problem.